What do I say about Joel? Before this weekend, I knew him by name. After this weekend, I know his heart. And we have become not only brothers in the Lord, but friends. There's no word to express our gratitude for him, the way God is using him and will use him tonight and will continue to use him. Thank you, Joel, for making time to be with us. May God continue to bless you wherever you go. Would you join me in welcoming him one more time?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening. I want to share with you two things tonight. I want to take you into Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. We're going to go through this prophecy in as much detail as we can in the time that we have. So if you've got your Bibles, please turn to Ezekiel 38 and 39. We're going to be studying what Bible scholars call the war of Gog and Magog. We're going to do that in a few moments. First, I want to just give you a little bit of context. My father's family was Orthodox Jewish, and my mom's side is English Methodist WASP. Okay? Now, my father's side, my grandparents and my great-grandparents, they escaped out of Russia under the Tsar during the pogroms, the terrible persecution of the Jews by the Tsar and those who certainly my family thought were Christians. This was in the early 1900s. Really, if you were living in anti-Semitic, fascist, Tsarist Russia in the early part of the 20th century, you had two options. You could fiddle on the roof, or you could try to get out. Now, by God's grace, my family was able to escape. Many weren't able, but God allowed this to happen, and my family hid in a hay wagon that was crossing a border, and Tsarist soldiers took their swords and plunged them into the hay just to check to see if anyone was in there. Now, by the grace of God, the unmerited favor of God, my family didn't deserve it, but God allowed these soldiers to plunge their swords in there without hitting them, without touching them. They didn't find my family. None of the children said, "Are we there yet? I gotta go to the bathroom." They got out, and having gotten out of anti-Semitic, fascist, Tsarist Russia, they could have said, "Whew, finally we're safe, and let's settle in Poland or Germany or Austria or somewhere in Central Europe," where many Russian Jews thought, "Okay, now we're good, now we're safe, we're out of the pogroms of Russia." But for some reason, God kept moving my family. Now, my family they were Orthodox Jews, they did not know Jesus as Messiah. They thought Christianity was the Tsar. There would be no reason to believe in Jesus. It was the furthest thing from their mind. But in God's mercy, he moved them across the continent of Europe, put them on a steamship, sent them to the United States, and they set up shop in Brooklyn, where every good Jewish family is born and raised, except those in London. Now, that's where my father and his brother were born, and they were raised Orthodox Jewish. But it didn't take for my father. There was a lot of tension in my father's home, in the synagogue, on the streets of Brooklyn in the 40s and 50s were dangerous and all kinds of troubles. And so at the age of 18, my father had had enough of it. Now, he was no angel, but he was fed up with his parents, fed up with the rabbi, fed up with Judaism, fed up with Brooklyn. So he decided to leave home at 18 and move to the promised land, La Jolla, California. Now, he certainly didn't want to move to Israel. That was more Jewish people. And he thought Jewish people, he didn't want to be part of it. Now, that's not every Orthodox Jewish life, or certainly not in Brooklyn. There's a lot of warm and wonderful people, but he was rebelling from it, okay? So he thought California sounded Gentile, perfect. So he trained to become an architect. He moved back to Syracuse, New York, just a little south of here, to get his first job in an architectural firm. And that's where he moved into an apartment complex and met a Gentile girl. And he thought, aha, a Gentile girl, perfect. I'll marry her. And he prepared to propose to her, bought an engagement ring. Well, my Jewish grandmother went ballistic, okay? The idea that he was going to marry a Gentile girl was just beyond her comprehension, and she offered to buy the engagement ring back from him at a profit not to do so. Now, given the tensions in my family at that time, my father did not take the money and run. He said, no, I'm going to marry this girl. And so in 1965, my now agnostic Orthodox Jewish father, you're like, what? Yeah, raised Orthodox Jewish, but was an agnostic. He didn't know what he believed at this point. And so he married my agnostic Methodist mother. My mom's side has circuit riding, gospel preaching Methodist missionaries on, if you go back a few generations. But she wasn't raised in a believing home. So they marry in 1965. They have me in 1967, and they're set off on a spiritual journey. Long story short, they decided to read the Quran. It didn't take. They decided to read the Bhagavad Gita, and they thought maybe we'll become Hindus, but they didn't go there either. They read the New Testament, and they didn't understand it. Very long story short, in 1973, my parents heard the gospel clearly presented from some young couples at a church that they happened to be attending in their spiritual journey, and my mother came to faith in Jesus Christ. And 6 months later, after going and attending a Bible study with some other young couples through the gospel according to Luke, my father came to faith in Jesus as Messiah. Now, he thought he was the first Jew since the Apostle Paul who believed this. He never heard of a Jewish person who believed in Jesus. He never met a Jewish person who believed in Jesus. And in 1973, there weren't a lot of Jewish people who believed in Jesus. But that was a spiritual transformation and revolution in our home. A few years later, in 1975, at the age of 8 years old, I gave my life to the Lord, and this sort of set us as a family into motion. Now, I then, went to college and fell in love with a wonderful girl that I met there, and we got married, and we moved to Washington, D.C., and I became a failed political consultant. Everyone I ever worked for 10 years lost, or quit, or retired, or were disgusted with politics. The only person, I think I mentioned this the other night, that didn't completely get out of politics was I was on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's comeback campaign team in the year 2000. It took him 9 more years to come back. So I was no help to anybody, and I was getting quite frustrated. And I thought to myself, Lord, I can't imagine that after you saving our family out of the pogroms and saving us out of Europe and saving us, to be born again, and why exactly am I a complete failure in my life? Is this useful to you in some way that I'm not? I mean, help me out here. I'm doing the work. I'm not a slacker. Come on, help me out. Tell me what to do. Well, ever since I was 8 years old, I wanted to write novels or screenplays. I had attended film school. I have a film degree from Syracuse University, so I love telling stories. I'm like one of the few Jewish people in North America that didn't get the financial gene, okay? I'm not your stockbroker. I'm not your hedge fund manager. I'm not your accountant. It's not going to happen for me. Nor am I your doctor or your lawyer or your acupuncturist or chiropractor. Look, I didn't get any of those Jewish gifts. I got the gift of making things up for a living. And so, unfortunately, there's a title. It's novelist, but I didn't know that for a while. And so that's what I decided to do. I said, all right, Lord, I'm going to get out of politics. I'm out. I'm clean, although I need a patch because, it's when I get excited about the political seasons. I want to write a political thriller, and maybe I can weave the gospel in some way, and I'll write a Tom Clancy-esque novel. And again, maybe I can have a spiritual theme in it. The gospel will be shared by somebody late in the book. And I thought, all right, well, that sort of draw people in, and maybe this is what I can do for my life. As I prayed about that, I have to tell you, I was not happy with what God said, because what I sensed He was saying was, yes, write a series of novels that explain how Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog, might come to pass. I said, you have got to be kidding, Lord. I'm not doing that. Now, you know me as, I've sold more than 3 million books, and I'm on, television and radio, and God has given us this ministry. I'm like, I didn't want any of it. I'm just confessing to you, I thought this was ridiculous. I don't want to be one of those prophecy nuts. I don't want to write a novel about prophecy coming true. You've got to be, Lord, come on. My life is already a failure. This will put me in the land of lunatics. I don't want that. I'm not moving to Roswell, New Mexico, and I'm not going to do it. We are a stiff-necked people. Can you imagine saying to God, listen, I don't want your plan for my life. Give me the plan that I think you want for my life. You ever express that to the Lord? It's ridiculous. And yet we do that. I did that. I resisted this so badly, it was painful. And the Lord was not having any of it. So I was like, oh, fine, I'll, whatever. I'll try to be faithful. Blah. Big. Now, if God had said you're going to sell millions of copies of books, you're going to travel the world, you'll meet prime ministers and presidents, and you'll share the gospel and teach Bible prophecy, I would have thought, if you told me what it was going to be, that there was going to be fruit from this, then yes, could you have given me a little hint that this was going to be useful? Because it really didn't look that way up front. And so he didn't say that, because he often doesn't tell us that the Jordan's going to part. You have to sort of step in, right? We know that Moses did it. It all worked out for him. But for us, we're like, Joshua standing there going, when's it open? No, you got to step in. Well, wait, it hasn't parted yet. Well, you got to step in this time. Well, that's not what Moses did. I know, just step in. So I wish I could tell you I was full of faith and boldness, and I wasn't. So I thought, all right, I'm going to write a novel. Now I'm going to walk you through the prophecy as I had studied it, so you can understand it for yourself. I wasn't trying to write exactly how it was going to happen, but how it might happen. It was a prophecy that was very important to me. Don't get me wrong. It's not that I didn't love prophecy and wasn't fascinated with prophecy, especially one about Russia, given my family roots. But I was, so stubborn. Our people, we're not the brightest people in the room sometimes. We may have some smarts, but we're not always the wisest. So you got to be gracious to us and merciful to us and pray for us. So look, I thought, okay, all right, I want to write a Tom Clancy type novel. I want it to be realistic. I want to share it with my friends in Washington in my political universe. I didn't really have any universe beyond that. I want to try to reach them with the gospel. So this novel has to have a realistic edge. I'm not writing some sort of goofy 42 exclamation points, everything in capital letters type prophecy novel. I just thought that sounded ridiculous. So I thought, okay, in the text, as we're about to see, Russia and Iran form an alliance against Israel in the last days of history. Now, I'm just front-loading one piece. The name of Iraq is not found in the text. It's not one of the countries that will attack Israel in the last days as part of this Russian-Iranian alliance. Now, Iraq is not a name that's found in the Bible at all, but the territory and the people groups that we know of as ancient Iraq, now modern Iraq, those are mentioned, right? Babylon, Babylonia, Mesopotamia, Shinar. There are a lot of names that cover that territory. None are listed in Ezekiel 38 or 39. Now, this presented a problem for me because as a novelist, as a new novelist, they never had done it before, have no story, don't know how to do it type novelist. You can see how crazy this was already. I thought, what will I do? Remember, this is 2001. I'm having this conversation with God in January 2001, having helped Steve Forbes lose 2 presidential campaigns and $70 million of his daughter's inheritance money, and therefore not getting hired by the George W. Bush, White House and all the rest. So I'm sitting there going, oh gosh. So okay, I'll write this novel, but if I write this novel about how this might happen, how this might come to pass, what am I going to do with Saddam Hussein? Okay, he was still in power. He's in power in Iraq. if this were to happen in my lifetime, in the near term, I thought, this prophecy, Ezekiel 38 and 39, then Russia and Iran, okay, they might form an alliance and all these other countries, but wouldn't Saddam say, what, you're gassing Jews? I'm in. I mean, wouldn't he already want to be part of the mission to destroy or conquer Israel, right? He had already launched 39 ballistic missile attacks at Israel during the first Gulf War, right? He'd already threatened to scorch half of Israel with chemical weapons. So I thought, I guess I can just put him in the coalition anyway. I'm a novelist. I'm making it up. What's the big deal? But the way I understand the Bible is you can't really make stuff up. Right? If the text doesn't say it, you can't just add it. Now, you can take a little artistic license in the gaps that we don't know of, as long as you make it clear it's fiction. But you can't just add in a coalition country that God has specifically not listed. It's not like God forgot. What? Iraq? Ooh, sorry. Oh, wow. Newman. It's not in there. If it's not in there, then somehow Iraq is not going to be part of the coalition. So I'm thinking, but Lord, Iraq is obviously a major end times player. So the country exists, the people exist. How is it possible that Saddam doesn't get involved? The only thing I could think of was that Saddam didn't exist anymore, that he wasn't in power anymore. So I thought, well, how might that happen? If that has to happen before Russia and Iran set into motion, how might that happen? So I spent some time considering those possibilities. And I thought, well, he could die of old age. Okay, that's boring. Okay. He could be assassinated, but he's already thought of that. There's like 8 body doubles, so who knows who's, he could have, so I thought of a number of ways, but in the end, the only way I could think of that he would be removed from power would be to have a foreign invasion of his country and remove him from power. I thought, well, okay, theoretically, yeah, that might be an interesting novel, but who's gonna do that? Well, there's only 2 countries on the planet in 2001 that could do that. Russia, which was his ally, so that wasn't going to happen, or the United States. So I thought, okay, all right, fine, Lord. Now, he's not talking back. I'm just having a conversation and he must be like, oh, Lord, have mercy, I guess he wouldn't say, Lord, have mercy. He would say, oh, I have to have mercy. But I mean, Joel. Anyway, he's letting me go through this process, okay? So I say, all right, but the United States is the only country that could remove Saddam from power. But why would they do that? So I thought of a whole bunch of reasons, and I finally decided, all right, what if a radical Islamic terror group attacked the United States, and in the process of retaliating, an American president decided he needed to deal with certain states that sponsor terror? So the first page of my first novel that I began writing in January of 2001, it's called The Last Jihad. The first page puts you inside the cockpit of a jet plane that's been hijacked by radical Islamic terrorists, and it's coming in on a kamikaze attack mission into an American city. Now, that's how the book begins. As the book unfolds, an American president is in the process of retaliating against these terror groups and decides he needs to remove Saddam Hussein from power because of Saddam's support of radical Islamic terrorist groups. I was finishing that novel, just a few chapters from the end, on the morning of September 11th, 2001. In our townhouse where my wife and I were living, 15 minutes away from Washington Dulles Airport. We're at that moment, as I was working on this book, finishing it. Flight 77 was being hijacked from our airport, turned around, flown over our house, and into the Pentagon. And when the book finally came out in November of 2002, the United States, Canada, the world was engulfed in a massive global debate over whether the Western powers should go into Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein from power. That's how the book launched. Now, regardless of what you think, whether that was a right decision, a wrong decision, I'm not talking about politics tonight. I'm talking about a first-time novelist writing a book about a kamikaze attack on the United States that leads to a war to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Because that novelist thinks that would have to happen, something like that, before Ezekiel 38 and 39 could come true. Because there can't be a leader in Iraq who's ready to project force against Israel. And that book landed at #1 on Amazon.com. It spent 11 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. No one had ever heard of me. No one had ever heard of the book. And suddenly I was on 160 radio and television shows talking about these issues. So this set into motion the series. Now, of course, now I'm saying, well, Lord, if you had just said that that's what was going to happen. No, I was a little more humbled at this point and thinking, oh my goodness. Why did I not want to write this series? Lord, God is opening doors that are amazing. And it has been a high-speed bullet train ever since. I went on to write an entire series on this topic. The centerpiece was the Ezekiel Option, a novel that looks at, the events have now built to a crescendo, and Russia and Iran make their move. I wrote a nonfiction book called Epicenter, where I explained how I got to this point of writing this book. And in the process of doing research on these books, I invited my father. I said, hey, Dad, would you like to go back to the old country and meet some fascists? And he said, sure. So we went to Moscow together, and we did research, and we met fascists, and it was quite interesting. So that's a little bit of the context by which I come to have a platform that you would invite me, of all people. I don't have a seminary degree. I'm not a pastor. I'm a failed political consultant with a personal interest in Bible prophecy who wrote a novel that was so eerily true that people decided, what in the world is going on in your head, son? And that has happened now for the last 14 years. So let me walk you through the prophecy that I find now so fascinating, particularly as we see Russia and Iran not only forming a military alliance, which I've been writing and speaking about for some time, warning about, but now they're engaged in combat just north of Israel in Syria. This has never happened in 2,500 years since this prophecy was written. Just this week, Vladimir Putin ordered Russian military forces into combat. Fighter jets, tanks, special forces. They're working in close coordination with the Iranian military. This week, Vladimir Putin, the emerging czar of Russia, signed a declaration drafting 150,000 new young Russian men into the Russian military. This is the biggest Russian military operation in the Middle East since 1941. And at that time, Russia was not collaborating with Iran. They were invading Iran. In 1941, the last time Russia did any military mission in the Middle East of this size or anything close, they were invading northern Iran. How times have changed. So let's look at this prophecy, and because people are asking, in the current environment, are we seeing prophetic significance to these events? Are we seeing the war of Gog and Magog being set into motion? I'm not going to answer that question up here at this part of this message. You're going to have to listen through. So let's study it together, and then we'll assess where we are. Fair enough? Okay. Ezekiel chapter 38, beginning in verse 1. I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I will turn you about, I will put hooks in your jaws, I will bring you out and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them splendidly attired, a great company with buckler and shield, all of them wielding swords. Let's stop there at the end of verse 4 just for a moment. Now already most people who are studying Bible prophecy are like, no. Let's go back to the Beatitudes, right? I mean, I may not understand them or believe them or follow them all, but at least I understand what they're saying. This Gog, Magog, I'm a Gog just thinking about it. I mean, who can understand this stuff? Rosh, Meshech, Tubal. I mean, this is why people don't study prophecy, Joel, because we don't understand it. Okay. Take a breath. It's all good. Take a breath. Now listen, you need to do some historical detective work to be able to discern these names. But even if you didn't yet, as you go through this text, what you'll find are clues. And when you're studying Bible prophecy, you need to deal with the clues that are there first. Even if you don't know the names, don't let that throw you. Gog is some sort of leader, right? He's a prince. He's a king or a political leader of some kind, of some geographic region, and he has an army. And God is about to pull him out into combat in some way, shape, or form. As we go through, we'll find verses that tell us that he's coming from the uttermost parts of the north. And he'll say, we'll see it, that he's coming against the mountains of Israel. So it's some geographic territory north of Israel, to the uttermost parts of the north. Other translations are the furthermost parts, the remotest parts of the north. Well, you know, if you were just pulling out a map and going to Jerusalem and going due north, if you go as far as you possibly can to the uttermost parts of the north, you're in Russia. If you go any further, you're in Canada. Okay? But that's going south. So you're in the clear. Okay? It's not you. So you feel a little bit better. But that doesn't prove it's Russia, so let's go through the text. So Gog is not, when you do the historical detective work, and I lay this out in the book Epicenter, what we find is that Gog is not a personal name. We're not looking for Fred Gog, or Bob Gog, or Dmitri Gog. No, this is a title, like a pharaoh or a czar. Okay? He's a leader. This is a title. And he's over the land of Magog. You're like, that's not helping me. Okay, just hang in there. Now, Magog, if you go back to Genesis 10, and you don't need to do it right now, but if you're taking notes, Genesis 10 is what we call the Table of Nations, right? Noah has 3 sons, and they have sons, and guess what? Magog is a descendant of Noah. Okay, it's a nation. And so is Meshech, and so is Tubal, and so are most of the countries we're about to meet. They're nations. They're people groups. Okay? Now, Rosh, that's the jump ball. Some people say it means head, Rosh Hashanah. It can also mean chief. But it could also, in this case, could be an actual proper noun, a place. Now, some scholars believe that Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal are Russia, Moscow, and the Tubal River in Tobolsk in Siberia. Now, not all Bible scholars who even study and teach on this believe that. Others have disagreements, but that is a significant body of people do think that. And again, I'm not saying it definitely is or isn't, but that's interesting. Now, we know that God says, "I'm against you." Whoever this Gog character is, he's a bad guy. He's one of the Bible bad guys, right? And we'll see as we go through the text. For example, in verse 10, it says, "You will devise an evil plan." Okay? This is somebody who's going to gather a military force of his own and with allies and attack Israel. Okay? And it's an evil plan. And God uses words like judgment to describe what's coming. Okay? So again, even if you didn't know where this was and you just were writing down details, what do I learn about Gog? Well, he's a military leader. He's a political leader. He's building a coalition. He has an army. He's evil. His plan is evil. He's going to come against Israel. So those are a lot of details, even if you're not sure exactly. Now, if you go through the details and you study Magog, what we found is that in Josephus, the ancient Jewish historian from the Roman era, first century, right? One of the most important historians of the first century, maybe the most important, certainly from a Jewish perspective. He writes that the Magogites, the people from Magog, are the people whom the Greeks called Scythians. Now, Scythian is a very important clue because we can pick up that trail easier. The Magogites were not written about much, although some in the history of history. But the Scythians, that's a term that we can follow that thread. In fact, my father and I went to Moscow, and as we were doing research on these projects, and he was helping me, we went to the State Historical Museum, which is located right on Red Square. Okay, so for Americans, it would be like the Smithsonian. I'm not sure what your major historical museums are, maybe in Ottawa or here in Toronto, but it's the big deal, like this is the official museum. Okay, so we go in and we're taking a tour, and lo and behold, in the ancient history section, they have case after case of artifacts from the Scythians. And they describe, right there in front of us, that the Scythians were some of the forebears of the Russian people. That's what the Russian government says. Now that's interesting. And we know, as you trace history, that the Magogites, the Scythians, were a people group that lived, a nation that lived in the Middle East, but then migrated north, and they settled north of the Black Sea and north of the Caspian Sea, in the places we now call Russia and some of the former Soviet republics. Now, we can't be super precise because these people have spread, but we know they went north, and we know that the Russians themselves say that the Scythians are part of their ancient history of the people who founded the modern state that we now call Russia. Okay? So we're beginning to establish this. Now in the book, and I give a lot more detail, and it's all end-noted, but for this point, again, not everybody agrees, not every Bible scholar thinks that Magog is Russia, but many do, and that's where I have come out for these reasons and a number of others. Now, this leader of Russia, therefore, is going to build an alliance. And the first country mentioned as part of the alliance is verse 5. The first country is Persia. That's the easiest country to identify in this list because until 1935, Persia was the official legal name of the country we now call the Islamic Republic of Iran. Okay? So Russia is going to form an alliance with Iran. This is stunning because for 2,500 years since Ezekiel wrote this prophecy, Russia and Iran have never had an alliance ever. As I mentioned, even as late as 1941, Russia had invaded northern Iran. They weren't happy together. They certainly weren't an alliance. In 1979, of course, the Ayatollah Khomeini led the Islamic Revolution in Iran, drove out the Shah, who, by the way, was pro-American and pro-Israel. So until 1979, you had a leader in Iran who was pro-American and pro-Israel. So you're like, well, this is never going to happen. I mean, you're never going to see Russia and Iran form an alliance against Israel. The Shah of Iran is happy with Israel. Israel buys oil from Iran. But then came the Islamic Revolution. Now, when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over Iran, he didn't go rushing into the arms of the Russians. No pun intended. He didn't do that. Why? Because the same year, in December, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the next door neighbor to the east of Iran. So Khomeini saw Moscow and the Soviet Empire as godless communists as they were. So there was no interest in working together. And yet the Bible says that Russia and Iran would be forming an alliance. When? Let's just take a note here. The Bible gives us some clues. First, just a Just a second. Just a moment. In verse 8, it says, after many days, you, Gog, will be summoned in the latter years. Okay? And you'll be coming to the land, you'll be coming against the land of Israel. Now, if you look at verse 16, it says, you will come against my people Israel. So we're now super clear of what the objective is. This military force is coming after Israel. And it says, you will come like a cloud to cover the land, and it shall come about when? In the last days. This is Old Testament eschatology. This means this is going to be something that happens before the Messiah comes to set up his kingdom. Okay? His physical kingdom on earth. So it's an end times event. Hasn't happened yet. So we know several things now. We're beginning to get a little bit of a sense of who and what and where and when. So let's keep going. No, let me also say that, so Russia and Iran had never formed this alliance. Now, in the early to mid-1990s, the Russians and the Iranians began to talk to each other. Why? Because the Soviet Union had imploded, right? Christmas Day, 1991, Soviet Union gone. Christmas Day, that was nice. And so they're imploding. They've got weapons, but no money. Now, at that same time, Iran had just come through an 8-year war with Iraq. Okay? It had killed 1 million people, and it ground down to a stalemate. So now, Iran, sitting on an ocean of oil and gas, has money, but it has no weapons. Okay? This is a match made in hell. Okay? But the Bible said it would happen. So in the beginning of the early to mid-1990s, Russia begins selling weapons to Iran. And then Russia decides, sure, when Iran asks, would you build us a nuclear reactor? Sure, we'd be happy to do that. We've built Chernobyl. We know what we're doing. Absolutely, we're there for you. Okay? But again, Russia needed cash. Okay? So that something that had never happened in 2,500 years was beginning to happen. Now, the Clinton-Gore administration got the Russians to sign an agreement that they wouldn't do it, and they signed it, and then they went off and did it. And so we were off and running. Now, when Vladimir Putin took over in 2000, he accelerated the relationship, the alliance with Iran. When Mahmoud Ahmadinejad came to power in Iran in 2005, the relationship accelerated even further. And now we see what we're seeing, right? We're watching Putin and the Ayatollah Khamenei working together in combat operations just north of the Israeli border. Now, is that proof? Let me just stop here for a second. Is that proof that the war of Gog and Magog is imminent? No, it is not. Is it proof that the ground is being laid for this prophecy to come true soon or in our lifetime? Not necessarily. Okay? We need to be cautious. We need to study the text. We need to analyze the present times, but we've got to be careful about drawing premature conclusions. Right? I mean, God could be allowing this to happen, and then things could unravel, and God could kick the can up the road years, decades, before he allows these events to happen in full. Okay? So we've got to be careful. There's no reason to lurch and jump and say, aha, and to go telling everybody we know, the war of Gog and Magog is happening right now. It's again, have some decaf. Just take a deep breath. It's all good. There's no point, because we discredit ourselves when we overreach and draw conclusions that we're absolutely sure are true, and we're premature. Right? And we bring discredit on the scriptures. These are the types of reasons that pastors don't teach this stuff. Because people wrote in the 1970s, the Soviet Union is Gog and Brezhnev is Gog, and this is, and it's all going to happen any moment, and then it didn't. I remember when my wife was running a women's conference for Beverly LaHaye, the wife of Dr. Tim LaHaye. LaHaye is probably the world's leading expert on the war of Gog and Magog. He's written about it extensively. He wrote a book in 1991, a nonfiction book very few people bought it, unfortunately, but it would explain this prophecy. Now, my wife was working for his wife, so I would go to these women's conferences with her, and it was kind of, I had nothing to do. I mean, I thought, well, if I was single, this would be very fun, but I'm here with my new bride. There's nothing to do here. But I would sit with Tim LaHaye, Dr. LaHaye, and we would talk, and he would try to convince me that the war of Gog and Magog was something coming in the future. Not imminently. I said, Dr. LaHaye, I know you're a scholar and probably one of the world's leading experts on prophecy, but I mean, let me just say, as somebody who's 24 years old, I got to tell you, I'm not sure if have you noticed, have you watched the news, you have any idea what's happening in the world? The Soviet Union is collapsing. The country's unraveling. The Russian bear has been declawed, sir. The Russians are never going to be a threat to anyone, and they're certainly not going to form an alliance with Iran against Israel. I mean, come on. I mean, 1,000 years from now, maybe. And he said, well, it doesn't look like it's going to happen now, but I'm telling you, someday. All right, whatever. If you say so, right? I mean, okay, I'm not that bright. I think I've made this clear. So let me just fast forward for a moment, because I just want to give you my thinking process on this. So one of my failed political roles, right, was working for Netanyahu, but one of them was when I was hired for a few months to work for Natan Sharansky. Now, Sharansky is a great hero among the Jewish people. He was born in the Soviet Union, and he was what was called a refusnik, and he was a champion of human rights for the Jewish people and others, but mainly the Jewish people. But he was imprisoned in the KGB Gulag for 9 years. Now, eventually, when he was released, he emigrated to Israel, and he became, over time, the deputy prime minister of Israel. Okay? And then I got hired by him, and that's pretty much when his political career, came to an end. I kid you not. I was hired to do communications work for him, and within months, he had retired and given up on politics completely. So I'm not saying it was entirely my fault, but I'm just being honest with you, so you can evaluate all that I'm saying fairly. Now listen, I'm on a plane from Washington, D.C. to New York with him. We were going to do a press conference together. He was doing the press conference. I was just organizing it. And we're sitting together, and I'm thinking, I'm sitting with a hero of the Jewish people. I mean, really, I can't even tell you how excited I was, and I was just trying not to, seem too ridiculously young. But I said to him at one point, listen, Mr. Sharansky, did you ever imagine when you were in the Gulag that you would, one day become the second most powerful man in all the state of Israel? And of course, he just laughed and said, no, I just wanted to see my wife, Avital. And I said, well, and he said, what's really interesting? It's not just, rising into the Israeli political system, but one time he was a minister, one of the government cabinet members in the Netanyahu government, the first time between 96 and 99. And he said, Bibi, the nickname for Netanyahu, called me into his office one day. And I said, Mr. Prime Minister, how can I help you? He goes, Natan, I want you to go to Moscow. He's like, I'm sorry, what? I want you to go to Moscow. And Natan's thinking, Moscow, I've been to Moscow, done Moscow, don't want to go back to Moscow. Right? Bibi, do you know my history? I spent 9 years in the prison. No, I want you to go. And Sharansky's telling me this on the flight, okay? So he says that Netanyahu told him, this is 1997, I believe, I have a dossier of intelligence where the Russians are working with Iran on some very dangerous things, including nuclear projects. I need you to go and meet with the head of the KGB. It was called the FSB at the time. And Sharansky said, okay, well, who's that? It's a guy you probably not heard of. His name is Vladimir Putin. Okay, Vladimir Putin. What am I supposed to do? Take these documents, this intelligence, and show him that we can see Russia and Iran are forming a very dangerous alliance. And if they don't stop, if they don't divert, 10 years from now, Iran could be in the position to build nuclear weapons. So Sharansky went. Now, as he's telling me the story, I'm mesmerized, right? First, I'm a kid next to a hero. Secondly, he's taking me inside the inner discussions, the private discussions of the Prime Minister of Israel, the now head of Russia, and Sharansky, and talking about intelligence information. Now, this wasn't classified to me at this point, but this was interesting to me. When then I got home after that trip, and I thought, now wait a minute. You're telling me that the Prime Minister of Israel is worried about a Russian-Iranian alliance? Where did I hear that? So I go out to my garage, and I start digging through every book that I can find. I'm trying to find the book that Tim LaHaye gave me, which I have now thrown away into a box to never be remembered ever again. And now I'm finally finding this book. And I read it, and I think, oh my goodness. I was telling, oh, Dr. LaHaye, if you think so, whatever, right? You're the expert, but, whatever. So, and now I'm thinking, wow, this could start happening. Now remember, now I'm starting to write a novel series, and God's reminding me, listen, I'm telling you this is coming, Joel. It may not be for many years, but things are starting to happen. You should write this series. Okay, and I just want to give you an insight to some of the things that prompted me to write this. Okay, let's get back to the text. So Persia, okay, I'm like, okay, I got it. It's starting to happen. The next country is Cush. Now, some of your Bibles say Ethiopia, but Cush is the upper Nile region of, so the upper Nile region, which means south, in this case, of Egypt. That's Sudan. It might also include Ethiopia, but primarily the territory now is what we call the Islamic Republic in Sudan. And that's interesting because Sudan is Arab, and Persia, which is next to it in the Bible, is Persian. Iran is Persian. Two different ethnicities. Sudan is Sunni Muslim, and Iran is Shia Muslim. And they sit on the different opposite sides of the Arabian Peninsula. There's no reason, they've never been allies in 2,500 years. Until now. When Mahmoud Ahmadinejad wanted to give a speech, he's like, I want to give a speech and talk about annihilating the Jews because they're the children of the devil. Where would I give that speech? Let's go to Sudan. They're friends, they're allies, let's do it. That's what he did. So the Bible is telling us that Russia, Iran, and Sudan are going to form some alliance. Nobody ever believed that for 2,500 years, but it's starting to look interesting. The next country is Put. Now, where do we put Put? Well, again, Josephus, the ancient historian, tells us that Put is ancient Libyos, what we would call Libya. But ancient Libya, it was a larger territory than just the modern nation state that we consider today. So probably also Algeria, maybe Tunisia, not as far as Morocco and Mauritania. But not Egypt. Egypt's not in the list. And it's interesting that Egypt isn't in this list, just like Iraq. Why? Because Egypt's been one of the main enemies of the Jewish people, since the Pharaoh. But in 1979, what happened? Jimmy Carter, bless his heart, signed a deal between Egypt and Israel. They made peace. Okay? So for the first time in human history, right now, you and me, 2015, live in a time where Egypt is it certainly has a peace treaty with Israel, and under the current leadership actually is working quite closely on security issues with Israel. And Iraq is such a mess, it couldn't possibly project force against Israel. We are living in the first window of human history, since this was written, where Egypt and Iraq are not threats to Israel. How long will that last? I can't tell you, but it's interesting. We're living in the first window where Russia and Iran and Sudan have a military alliance together. How long will that last? I don't know, but it's interesting. The next country is Gomer. This is not where Gomer Pyle is from. This is the country of Turkey. The next country is Beth Togarmah. This is the Turkic-speaking peoples that spread out from what we call Turkey across Central Asia in the stands, Turkmenistan and some of the other Islamic republics. Now, we can't be super precise on every little detail of this, but we can get a sense of what's happening. Now, what's interesting is in verse 7, God, the God of heaven, says to Gog, the head of Russia, get ready, be prepared. Okay? And he says, after many years, you will be summoned. In the latter years, you will come into the land that is restored from the sword, whose inhabitants have been gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had been a continual waste, but its people were brought out from the nations, and they are living securely, all of them. And you will go up like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your troops and the many peoples with you. And it goes on. It says that Israel will be living securely. Now you say, well, Israel's not living securely. It doesn't have peace with all of its neighbors. Admittedly, it does not have peace with all of its neighbors. It has a peace treaty with Egypt and with Jordan. Iraq is fairly neutral right now. But obviously, Lebanon is a wholly owned subsidiary of Iran. Hezbollah, the terrorist group run by Iran, has 100,000 missiles pointed at us from southern Lebanon. And Syria, you understand what's happening in Syria. So that's true. We're not living securely in one sense. But the word peace is never used in the text. It's very interesting. Never used. So it's possible, it's possible that God doesn't mean peace treaties all around. What he might mean is just Israelis are feeling secure. But remember, a threat is rising here. They're secure at the one side, but on the other hand, there's a major force that's emerging, right? So it's a contradiction. Not a contradiction, it's a conundrum. Okay? And Israelis, if you talk to Israelis now, that we feel more secure than we ever have in all of our history. We're Jews. We get that people hate us, right? We don't like it, but we get that. But we've got the best air force in the region, the best ground forces in the region. We've got an Iron Dome system that shoots these rockets out of the sky. We've got, we feel we got economic growth and high technology, and things are going reasonably well for us. In the grand scheme, Israelis, if you look at any poll, feel secure, though they see the Iran nuclear threat rising, they see the Islamic State rising, and now they've got a real nuclear power operating just a few miles north of their border. Does that check off the list? Is that the conundrum of which God speaks? I don't know. Again, these are not conclusive facts yet. It's not conclusive that this is coming to pass, but it's curious. Now, if you go through the rest of this text, and I encourage you to study Ezekiel 38, 39, what you find is this Russian-Iranian alliance is forming against Israel, but it's coming primarily from the north. Now, Lebanon and Syria are not mentioned, but much of the force comes from the north against the mountains of Israel. Well, where are the major mountains of Israel? They're on the border with Lebanon, and they're on the border with Syria, the Golan Heights. Okay? So you'd be expecting the Russian-Iranian forces primarily to come from the north, though you'd have others surrounding Israel in other ways. Now, this is what God says happens. Now, if you go through this text, and I encourage you to do it, especially in the current environment, you will not find any country that comes to Israel's defense. No country is described as rushing to Israel's aid. Not the European Union, not Canada, not the UN, not the US. Now, when I wrote these books in 2005 and 2006, people gave me a lot of pushback. Joel, are you saying that the United States is going to cut Israel loose someday and not come to Israel's defense if Russia and Iran formed an alliance against her? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Well, you're nuts. You were bad at politics, now you're bad at prophecy. Move on, son. Look, I understand that. But I understand it the way Tim LaHaye told it to me. I understand that at a certain moment it doesn't look like it could possibly be true, but we teach it anyway. We don't have to connect all the dots. That's not our responsibility. It's to teach the text. And the text says this is going to happen. In other words, it doesn't mention the United States, but it doesn't say that any country will come. That means Prime Minister Harper, as wonderful as he is about being pro-Israel, if he's the prime minister when these things head into motion, he's not coming to Israel's defense either. What will happen is that Israel will be the most isolated, most cut off, most threatened, most endangered in all of human history. And then what happens? Verse verse 18 of chapter 38. It will come about on that day when Gog comes against the land of Israel, declares the Lord God, that my fury will mount up in my anger. In my zeal and in my blazing wrath, I declare that on that day there will surely be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth, and all the men who are on the face of the earth will shake at my presence. The mountains will be thrown down, the steep pathways will collapse, every wall will fall to the ground. I will call for a sword against him who, Gog, the head of Russia, the head of this coalition, on my mountains, declares the Lord God. Every man's sword will be against his brother. With pestilence and with blood, I will enter into judgment with him, with Gog. And I will rain on him and on his troops and on the many peoples who are with him, a torrential rain with hailstones, fire, and brimstone. I will magnify myself, sanctify myself, and make myself known in the sight of many nations. And they will know that I am the Lord. Do you understand what's happening here? God is going to allow no nation to come to Israel's defense. Israel's going to feel isolated, cut off, endangered, about to be annihilated, wiped off the face of the earth. And when nobody comes to its aid, God will supernaturally step in. Why? To show that Israel has no hope except for him, to show the nations that he is God. There's going to be disease, there's going to be fire from heaven, there's going to be earthquakes, there's going to be the armies of the enemies of Israel will turn against each other and start attacking each other. It's going to be horrific, apocalyptic. And God will do a supernatural work to physically save the Jewish people, the state of Israel, in the last days of history. And he will do it to bring glory to himself. Not because our people deserve it. Not because you don't hear anything about people turning for prayer or fasting or begging God. He just does it. Now you have to understand, this will be the most dramatic intervention of God into the affairs of mankind since the resurrection. But that was not seen by the whole world. Remember, a very small handful, 500 or 600, saw the resurrection, saw the effects of the resurrected Jesus, saw him, right? It was powerful, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't a global event at that time. It was a very isolated event, and those people needed to become witnesses to the rest of the world, and they did. This will have been the most dramatic moment of reaching in geopolitically into human history to protect the Jewish people and defeat in a supernatural way her enemies since Yul Brynner was taken on by Charlton Heston, okay? In the Passover story. This is going to be big. But remember, when that happened, Egypt saw it, Israel saw it, but the rest of the world didn't see it. Now Rahab, when the spies came into the land, they said, she goes, we're trembling. We've heard about your God. We've heard what your God has done for you. Heard, right? Because she didn't have cable television. She didn't have satellite television. She didn't have CTV or CNN or Fox or MSNBC if it's still around. I mean, she didn't have these things, right? But look what happens in chapter 39. Verse 21, God says something very interesting. He says, in the midst of all these things that happen, he says, I, God, will set my glory among the nations, and all the nations will see my judgment which I have executed, and my hand, which I have laid on them. Everybody in the world will have the opportunity. Every nation will have the chance to see these events unfold. Fire falling from heaven, massive earthquake, disease, internecine warfare, as God destroys the enemies of Israel at the last possible moment. And this is the first window in human history where we could see that from afar because of the miracle of global satellite television technology. You could never have done this in all of human history, and now we're in that window. Does that mean conclusively that this prophecy will happen soon or even in our lifetime? Not necessarily. It's not conclusive, but it's curious. Now, I would love to be able to take you through every verse, because what you watch is a dramatic, powerful, supernatural intervention of God, and then it takes 7 years to burn all the weapons that are collected by the Israeli forces when... And by the way, the Israelis are not fighting either. You don't see anything about Israel defending itself. This is God supernaturally doing it, and Israel and the world watching. Okay? That's a very important element. But it's going to take 7 years to burn all the weapons that are recovered. It's going to take 7 months to bury all the bodies of the slain enemies of Israel. It would take longer, the Bible explains, except that the birds of the air and the beasts of the field eat most of the bodies. Study this. Internalize it. Process it. Talk about it amongst yourself. Read other people's accounts. Try to understand this because it's relevant. I can't tell you it will happen soon or in our lifetime, but I can't tell you it won't. These events are moving rapidly. And again, we've never seen Russia and Iran in combat just a few dozen miles north of the mountains of Israel. This has never happened. Never happened. Now, what's the ultimate goal of God here? Judgment is certainly one of them. We've seen that word, judgment. It's happened several times here. But as we conclude, I want to look at what's God's ultimate purpose. He certainly wants to show the nations his glory. And as he does that, I will note, I believe this is the end of radical Islam as we know it. It's the end of apocalyptic Islam as we know it. It's probably the end of Islam. Why? Because these countries, if this happens in the next, 20, 30, 50, 100 years, if these countries are Islamic, as they currently are, right, the word Islam is not in there, if this happens in our lifetime or in the age of Islam, then you will have Muslim countries working with Russia to form this alliance, and they will be destroyed supernaturally on worldwide television. Now, if you're a Muslim, you will be so excited, if you're radical or apocalyptic, you'll be so excited Israel's really going to be wiped off the map. Ahmadinejad's promise is going to come true. Woohoo! And then you're going to watch, and you go, any moment, and then you're going to watch fire fall from heaven on your team. Now, it's going to be very hard to wake up the morning after this and say, Allahu Akbar, God is great. Who will believe that? Okay? Nobody will believe this. Now, I'm not saying there won't be a single Muslim on the planet. I mean, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there really isn't Marxist-Leninist communists anymore. I mean, at Berkeley or maybe some of the university campuses, there are a few, but overall, communism is dead, right? Even in China, it's not Maoist communism. It's really corrupt capitalism at this stage, right? Communism's dead. This is the end of Islam. It's the end of radical Islam. It's the end of apocalyptic Islam. And these events have to happen before the tribulation. Very quickly. Why? Because Israel's burning weapons. For 7 years, they're going to burn weapons. Now, when the Antichrist invades the beautiful land, as Daniel says it will, during the tribulation, what Jew in their right mind is burning a weapon? Big mistake. Now, we're not the brightest people on the planet always, but this we get. You're not burning a weapon if the Antichrist is about to invade your land, right? And it can't happen in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Why? Because Israel's living securely. Now you say, well, they're going to have a peace treaty with the Antichrist. That's true, but what's happening in the rest of the world when Israel gets her peace treaty? The rest of the world is going up in flames. I mean, study the tribulation. A quarter of the world is dying. Disease is spreading over the entire planet. I mean, Israelis who might have a piece of paper saying, the Antichrist loves you, don't worry, they're not going to be going, oh, well, the rest of the world is dying by the billions, but let's go to the beach. It's all good for us. We're a pessimistic people. We're a glass half empty type people. We're a glass half empty and there's a crack in it and it's leaking and it'll be gone by tomorrow and probably by tonight type people, right? We're not going to be going, woohoo, well, we've got our treaty and the rest of the world's going up in smoke. Oh, well, no problem for us. No, that's not how it's going to work. We will not feel secure in the tribulation, okay? So these things have to happen before the tribulation, which is why the Antichrist, the final capital A Antichrist, cannot be a Muslim. Cannot be. Because even though it looks like, a one world government and the caliphate and all the rest of it, it all sounds like it's coming to be the Antichrist, beheadings and so forth. But Islam will be gone before the tribulation because of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Okay? You study this. You test this. See if I'm right. Okay? So it means that, and this is the thing, just because we see Islam having a global empire, global kingdom type approach, doesn't mean that it's the final Antichrist system. It's a little Antichrist, little a Antichrist system, but what you're really watching is the DNA of Satan. Okay? Whether it's Stalin trying to take over the world, or Hitler trying to take over the world, or a Muslim trying to take over the world, all of that is satanic. Okay? And he will come up with another way, and that will be the final way. Okay, last point about the why. What's really happening here? Yes, judgment. Yes, neutralizing Islam in order to prepare the way for a final religious system for the Antichrist. But this is the main reason. Verse 25 of chapter 39, okay? Therefore, thus says the Lord God, now I will restore the fortunes of Jacob and have mercy on the whole house of Israel. And I will be jealous for my holy name. They will forget their disgrace and all their treachery which they have perpetrated against me. When they live securely on their own land with no one to make them afraid, when I bring them back from the peoples and gather them from the lands of their enemies, then I shall be sanctified through them in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God, because I made them go into exile, I made them to go into exile among the nations, and then gather them again to their own land. And I will leave none of them there any longer. Now let's stop for a moment. Remember that Ezekiel 38 and 39 come after what chapter? 37. I know, just stick with me. We're almost done. Ezekiel 39, that's the famous prophecy, set of prophecies about Israel being resurrected as a nation state in the last days of history. Jews returning to the land of Israel after centuries of exile. Jews, by God's help and grace, making the deserts bloom and rebuilding the ancient ruins. That's chapter 37. So a lot of this has already happened. That's how can Russia and Iran attack Israel in the last days if there isn't an Israel, right? There has to be an Israel. And now we're 67 years in. And so a lot of this has happened. But what happens as this process continues? God says, I will continue to gather them to their own land, and I will leave none of them there any longer. What percentage of Jewish people are going to be making Aliyah? 100%. Okay? God is not going to leave it. Now, it doesn't mean we can't travel, but he is drawing every Jewish person back to the land. If you want to invest in real estate in Israel. Okay, now you heard me say I don't have a financial gene, so take that, with a grain of salt. But apartments, I'd be in. Except, we're trying to raise 4 kids, so they've got all our money. So, but if anybody has any, I wouldn't. Look, 5 million American Jews are inbound for Israel. When? I don't know when. The Jews of Canada. Events are going to move so that Jews feel like they have to come back to the land. And then what happens? So that's another element of the why. To shake up the world, but draw Jews back to the land. Now, last piece. Verse 29. Chapter 39, verse 29. This is the big finish. God says, I will not hide my face from them, the Jewish people, any longer. For I will have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel, declares the Lord. When this happens and fire falls from heaven to consume the enemies of Israel, God is also going to pour out his Holy Spirit on the Jewish people, on the house of Israel, on the state of Israel. And when he pours out his Holy Spirit, what's the Spirit's job? To point us to Messiah. To point us to Yeshua, to Jesus, to open our eyes, to open our ears, to open our hearts. This is going to represent the most dramatic ingathering of the Jewish people into the kingdom of the Messiah before the kingdom actually comes to earth. This is the most dramatic moment of Jewish harvest into becoming followers of Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, in all of human history. More Jews will come to faith in the course of these events than at any other time in 2,000 years. And I also believe that as God pours out his Spirit on the Jews and the world is watching, more Muslims are going to come to faith than at any other time. They are going to be shattered. They will be shattered of their religion, and they will be thinking, who is this God of Israel? I'm in. And this is why we need to be preaching the gospel now to Jews and to Muslims. Not because every single Jew and Muslim will accept it yet, but because we're being faithful to the Great Commission, which should be reason enough, and because we're planting seeds that will bear fruit. If this happens in our lifetime, and especially if this happens soon, we don't want to have missed the opportunity to share the gospel. And I would add, to the enemies of Israel, we need to share the gospel with them because many of them are going to die in judgment. And we need to have tried to reach them with the love of Christ because we know what's coming. We should not rejoice. We can rejoice that God's going to protect his people, but we should not be like, woohoo, it's so exciting, all the Muslims are going to die. The Russians, no, that is not love. We need to love our enemies. And the clear conclusion is that we need to pray for the enemies of Israel. We need to love them. We need to try to reach them even as we reach the Jewish people, knowing it's going to work. These seeds are going to bear fruit. Now, I need to conclude, and you can see there's a lot of material here. But I want to encourage you. God is moving. Yes, darkness is falling, but the Holy Spirit is moving in great power. This is not a lost cause. For 2,000 years, if you were preaching the prophecies about the coming of the rebirth of Israel, it would have been a tough sell. We should have done it anyway, because it's the right thing. That's what God said. But it was hard to see it. But now you and I have seen it. We're 67 years in. We've seen these prophecies come true. And because Ezekiel 36 and 37 have come true, the rebirth of Israel, the ingathering of Jews, that raises the question. It begs the question, what other prophecies are coming true, and how soon might they come, and how should we live in light of that? This is a big question. Can I tell you that the current events with Russia and Iran, north of Israel, in Syria, are the precursor, conclusively, to the war of Gog and Magog? I can't tell you that conclusively, and I won't. Not until we get more data. Can I tell you that Vladimir Putin is Gog? No, I can't tell you that. I can tell you he is Gog-esque. But we don't have enough data yet. Can I tell you that these events will come to pass soon or in our lifetime? I can't, but they could. And the question is, will you and I be found faithful? These events, we could be raptured before these events finish, but maybe not. will you and I be faithful so when we see our Messiah face to face one day, we will have done everything we could. We will give every dollar we could. We will give every gospel tract we could. We've helped every ministry we could to reach Jews and Muslims so that we can hear from our Savior's lips, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You were faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." God bless you. Thank you.